You know, we've all heard of amnesia, where you forget about the past. The mind works all right for the present, but you can't remember anything about yesterday. You can't understand the present unless you understand the past. If your memory of the past were suddenly wiped out, we wouldn't know what to do, what to think. We need to go back to the past to understand what is happening now and in the future. In Revelation 12:7-9, we're told, and the war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought with the dragon. And the dragon and his angels fought, but they did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer. The great dragon was cast out, who deceived the whole world. He was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him, the old serpent called the devil and Satan. And as we watch the news today, we see the results of the work of the devil. You know, the catastrophes and the atrocities all over the world, and sometimes even in our communities, in our families, and even in our church, we can see the influence of the devil. We are very conscious of his deeds and power. In the Bible, we can read the words of what the devil has to say in 3 places. In Genesis, he is slandering God to man. And in Job, he's slandering man to God. And then in Matthew, the devil tempts Jesus. First, his physical of the bread. Second was spiritual, trusting God. And third was Jesus' vocation. It doesn't matter which way he wants it or you want it, he is there slandering. Now, a little history, which for people who don't like history. He's no longer free to stir up rebellion in heaven. And Satan's anger is so great against God. He was determined to ruin the human race and their happiness and peace. He was determined to bring upon them the guilt and penalty of sin. He would change their love to reproach against their Maker. He wanted the innocent beings to have the same misery which he himself was enduring. Also, he wanted desperately to cast dishonor on God and cause grief in heaven. Our first parents were not left without warning of the danger that it was threatening them. Heavenly messengers opened to them the history of Satan, the fall, and his plot for their destruction. How important was it then that Adam and Eve should honor the law by which alone it was possible for order to be maintained? The law of God is as sacred as God himself. The harmony of creation depends upon the perfect conformity of all beings, of everything, animate and inanimate, to the law of the Creator. God has ordained laws for the government, not only of living beings, but of all the operation of nature. Everything is under fixed laws, which cannot be disregarded. You can't jump out of a plane and expect to live if you don't have a parachute. We have these fixed laws. But while everything in nature is governed by natural laws, man alone, the crowning work of creation, obedience was required. Like the angels, the dwellers in Eden had been placed upon probation. Their happy estate could be obtained only on condition to the Creator's law. They could obey and live, or disobey and perish. God had made them the recipients of rich blessings, but should they disregard his will, he who spared not the angels that sinned could not spare them. Transgression would forfeit his gifts and bring upon them misery and ruins. The angels warned them as God has warned them. By his word, he warns us today to be on guard against the devices of Satan and his efforts to seduce Adam and Eve. If they were obedient to God, the evil one could not harm them. The tree of knowledge has been made a test of their obedience and their love for God. Satan wasn't to follow them continuously with temptations. He could only access them at the tree. Should they attempt to investigate its nature, they would be exposed to his ploys. They were told, listen to the warning with God. The couple were instructed to stay away from the tree. And in order to accomplish his work unnoticed, Satan chose to employ as his medium the serpent, a disguise well adapted for his purpose of deception. The serpent was then one of the wisest and most beautiful creatures on the earth. He had wings while flying through the air, presents an appearance of dazzling brilliance, having the color and brilliancy of varnished gold. Resting in the rich laden branches of the forbidden tree and displayed with that delicious fruit, he was there to tempt. How many times have we been deceived by how a person or thing works? You know, in one of the churches I was a member of, there was a single lady with 2 kids, and her car was falling apart, literally falling, hardly running. And for 6 months, every time there was a meeting where it was Sabbath school in church, she had special prayer for her to find a car. Now, some of the church members had some cars. They were older cars, but they were low mileage. And you were talking back in the 80s, late 70s. For some reason or other, they were practically given to her, but she didn't want them. She didn't like this about them or that about this. And so one day she come to church all excited. You know, she said, God had pressed me to turn down this street that I never go down and go over here, turn down another one, and there was a car, this beautiful bright red car, sports type looking. And she said, it's an answer to prayer. Well, you know what? For the next year, all we heard about is the woes about this car. The transmission had to be replaced. The engine had to be replaced. She had to borrow money. And it ends up that she probably put more money in that than she went out and bought a new car. I don't believe God leads us in that direction. But in that garden of peace, Lord, the destroyer, watching for his prey. How many people are deceived with their life savings that they'll get a greater return on their investment? Or if it's a good deal, maybe you better look twice, because the devil is lurking today much more than he was in the Garden of Eden. The angels had cautioned Eve to beware of separating herself from her husband. While occupied in the daily labor in the garden, with him she would be in less danger from temptation if she were alive. but absorbing in her pleasing task, she wandered from his sight. On realizing that she was alone, she felt danger, but dismissed her fears, deciding that she had sufficient wisdom and strength to discern evil. Unmindful of the angel's caution, she soon found herself gazing with curiosity on the forbidden tree. The fruit was very beautiful. Why had God withheld it from them? And now was the tempter's opportunity. As if he were able to discern the workings of her mind, he addressed her. In Genesis 3:1, we are told, "Yeah, have God says, you shall not eat of every tree of the garden?" Eve was surprised and startled as she seemed to hear the echo of her thoughts. But the servant continued in his musical voice with praise of her surpassing loveliness. And his words were not displeasing. Instead of fleeing from the spot, she lingered to hear the serpent speak. Had she been addressed by a being like the angels, her fears would have been excited. But she had no thought that this fascinating serpent could become the medium of the fallen foe. You know, I never understood how Eve in a perfect garden with perfect thoughts and everything could be tempted. But about 35 years ago, I caught a call from a lady, a church member. And, you know, her voice was as sweet as pie, and I don't know if anything that was negative about her, but she talked to me for about an hour on the phone, and, you know, I was agreeing with her when I hung up. And I thought, after I hung up, I says, I was there. I saw it. That wasn't the way it happened. But yet, in less than an hour, she had changed my thoughts. And then I can understand how easily Eve could have been deceived. And there's another thing. We had this one church, there was this pastor. And everybody would say, going in the board meeting, he's not going to get his way tonight. And he was domineering. He was from another country. And so when somebody, you could see when he was saying something and people were shaking their head, no. You know, they weren't saying it, but they were shaking their head, and you could see people doing it. And then he would look at them and start talking, and pretty soon they were going, yeah. And then he would go to the next one that was opposite of what he was wanting. And you know, there's a program. It's called Neuro-Linguistic Programming. They used to call it NLP. It's still on the internet. Salesmen, businessmen, preachers all go and study this. And it is an approach to connect between the neurological process, which is language, and the behavioral patterns learned through experience, programming. And these can change and make people change their specific goals. And people that go in this program, if they're salesmen, there's hundreds of them that will testify that their sales drastically improved when they went to this. You know, maybe Satan used something like this in heaven to the other angels. Anyway, to the tempter question, she replied, we may eat of the fruit of the trees, Genesis 2:7, of the garden. But the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God has said, you shall not eat of it, neither shall you touch it, lest you die. And the serpent said unto the woman, You shall surely not die. For God does know that in the days you eat thereof, your eyes will be opened, and you shall be as gods, knowing good from evil. By taking of this tree, he declared, they would obtain a more exalted existence and enter a broader field of knowledge. He himself has eaten of the forbidden fruit, and as a result had acquired the power of speech. And he insinuated that the Lord's jealousy desired to withhold it from them, lest they should be exalted and be equal with God. Does that sound familiar? It was because of its wonderful properties, imparting wisdom and power, that he had prohibited them from tasting, or even touching it. How could it be possible for them to die? Had they not eaten of the tree of life? God had been seeking to prevent them from reaching a more noble development, finding greater happiness. He tempts men to distrust God's love and to doubt his wisdom. He is consistently seeking to excite a spirit of curiosity, a restless desire to penetrate the secrets of divine wisdom and power. In their effort to search out what God had been pleased to withhold, multitudes overlook the truth, which he has revealed, and which are essential for salvation. Satan tempts men to disobedience by leading them to believe they are entering a wonderful field of knowledge. But this is all a deception. Elated with their ideas of progression, they are, by trampling on God's commandments, setting their feet in a path that leads to death. The serpent plucked the fruit of the forbidden tree and placed it in the hands of reluctant Eve. Then he reminded her of her own words, that God had forbidden them to touch it, lest they die. She would receive no more harm from eating the fruit, he declared, than from touching it. Perceiving no evil result from what she had done, Eve grew bolder. And when she saw the tree was good for food, and it was pleasant to the eyes, she did eat. She took the fruit thereof and ate, and it had a good taste. And as she ate, she seemed to feel a power and imagine herself entering upon a higher state of existence. Now, since she transgressed God's law, she became the agent of Satan in working the ruins of her husband. In a state of strange, unnatural excitement, with her hands filled with the forbidden fruit, she sought his presence and related all that occurred. An expression of sadness came over the face of Adam. He appeared astounded and alarmed to the words of Eden. He replied, this must be the foe against whom they had been warned. And by divine sentence, she must die. In answer, she urged him to eat, repeating the words of the serpent, that they shall surely not die. She reasons that this must be true, for she felt no evidence of God's displeasure, but on the contrary, realizing an exhilarating influence, filling every facet of her new life. She imagined, as inspired the heavenly messengers, Adam understood that his companion had transgressed the command of God, disregarded the only probation laid upon them at the test of their fidelity and love. There was a terrible struggle in his mind. He mourned that he had permitted Eve to wander from his side. But now the deed was done. He must be separated from her, who had been his joy. How could he have it thus? Adam had enjoyed the companionship of God and the holy angels, and he had looked upon the glory of the Creator. He feared of losing the one gift which in his eyes, love, gratitude, loyalty to the Creator. But all was overborne by the love of Eve. She was a part of himself. And he could not endure the thought of separation. He did not realize the same infinite power who had been from the dust of the earth created him, a living form, and had in love given him a companion. He resolved to share her fate. If she must die, then he would die with her. He reasoned, might not the words of the wise serpent be true? Eve was before him, as beautiful and as innocent as before the act of disobedience. She expressed greater love for him than before. No sign of death appeared in her, and he decided to brave the consequences. He seized the fruit and quickly ate. And after his transgression, Adam at first imagined himself entering a higher state of existence. You know, and I thought of this a few years ago when we were in Chicago. They had a talk show. And the basic of this 2-hour talk show was businessmen in their 50s marrying their secretaries in their 20s. And they told about how they had felt empowered when they were 50s and they were going to the fine restaurants and stuff with the young, beautiful secretary on their arm, or now their young, beautiful wife because they disposed of their former wife. But it went on that most of them found out that after 2 or 3 or 4 years, the secretary was as bad or worse than the wife they disposed of. And they were younger now, and they wanted to go out and party and things at night when they were getting older and tired, saying, I don't want to go out and party at night. But soon the thought of his sin filled Adam with terror. In the air, which had been a mild and uniform temperature, seemed chilly to the pair. The love and peace that had been theirs was gone, and in its place they felt a sense of sin, a dread of the future, a nakedness of soul. The robe of life which had showered them now disappeared. And to replace it, they endeavored to fashion a covering for themselves. For they could not, while unclothed, meet the eyes of God and the holy angels. And now they began to see the true character of their sin. Adam blamed his companion for her folly in leaving his side and permitting herself to be deceived by the serpent. But they both flattered themselves that he who had given them so many evidence of his love would pardon this one transgression, that they would not be subject to such a punishment as they had feared. And Satan gloated in his success. He was happy. He had tempted the woman to just trust God's love and doubted God's wisdom and to transgress his law. And through her, he had caused the overthrow of Adam. Adam could neither deny or excuse his sin. But instead of manifesting penance, he endeavored to cast blame upon his wife, and thus upon God himself. The woman who thou hast given me, she gave me the fruit, and I did eat. And when the woman was asked, what is this thou hast done? And she answered, the servant beguiled me, and I did eat. Why did thou create the servant? Why did thou let him in Eden? Like Adam, she charged God with the responsibility of their fall. The spirit of self-justification originated with the father of lies. It was indulged by our first parents as soon as they yielded to the influence of Satan, and has been exhibited by sons and daughters of Adam and down through the ages till today. Instead of humbly confessing their sins, they tried to shield themselves by casting blame upon others. The very fact that Christ bore the penalty of man's transgression is a mighty argument. To all created intelligence, that the law is chainless. God is righteousness and merciful and self-denying. You know, and even yet today, we have the history, and we hear it, of the devil slandering God. And I looked up on the internet, different preachers and writers, and one of them says, you know, you're going to be in hell for eons. They said, the people of Sodom and Gomorrah have been suffering the vengeance of eternal fire for roughly 4,000 years now, and they have absolutely no hope of relief. They have been in horrible pain for 4,000 years, and they have to look forward to is more torture for the rest of eternity. And the Lord has sent them forth as an example for mankind, that this is what they do. And this is what we will see if we continue to live ungodly. You know, in the Quran, Allah talks about it. And I have talked to many people who give Bible studies, and they don't see any problem with it. They don't see any problem that a God of love can torture people with eons of time. And one of the great examples of is Robert Ingersoll. You know, he was studying theology, and his thing was he had to go with an evangelist for a certain period of time to get. And the evangelist told night after night, or different meetings that he went, you know, there's these babies with molten lead running through their veins, that their horrible pain is going to be never ending for eons and eons and eons. And after he heard that several times, he just couldn't imagine, how could a God of love be like that? Babies. And finally one night, when this evangelist was preaching that, he went out and he shook his head to the heavens and said, God, I hate you. And he became a confirmed atheist. You can read about him. I mean, they say that he was a tremendous orator that could have done much for the cause of God. But he listened to the words of the Satan. Satan is still, by many ways, slandering God to man, just as he did in Eden. You know, in Matthew 24:24, there shall arise false Christs and false prophets, and they shall show great signs and wonders, insomuch that if possible, they will deceive the very elect. And Dave, when we were talking about this a while back, says, we are the elect. I always looked at it, somebody with a lot more education and stuff. But what we have to watch, in the end time, Satan is going to do everything to twist the minds of people. We need to fortify our minds with the Bible and the Word of God and what Satan actually says. We need to guard against his tricks. We need not to listen to the voice of the devil, but we need to listen to the voice of God. In the last days, we are to study and know for sure that God's Word, and it's God's Word, not the voice of the devil. The devil is going to use every means for us to question God. He is going to twist everything possible, but maybe be wise enough only to listen to the voice of